Hello, everyone, and welcome to our masterclass with Martin Wittmann. A short, quick introduction. We have the translation via Wordly. You can find the link in the chat box, and then you can choose your preferred language. And for our Turkish community, we have live translation in Zoom. And now, today, the topic of our masterclass is the scientific basics plus McMakin programs of our MagHealy. And now I will hand over to Martin. Martin will take now over to the presentation. Hello, Martin.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. So, I will now go a little deeper on the McHealy scientific basics and, of course, also on the McMakin programs and what's behind FSM, so frequency-specific microcurrent, and all those details. So let's dive into the presentation. Here we go. So, wait a second. Okay. So, most important is, of course, to know that MagHealy has many different, let's say, functions or program groups, and also things how you can use the MagHealy. You can use the MagHealy on your body. You can use it for your room. You can also use it with two frequencies at the same time. So, but what is actually, the basics of all the magnetic field influence on our body, and how do frequencies actually, administer through space, and that we will see in a second. So first a short notice, and then scientific basics of electromagnetic fields. So first of all, what is the structure of an electromagnetic field? And as you can see here on the right side, it's very nicely illustrated that you have a magnetic field which goes up and down in this case, and an electrical field that is basically 90 degrees on this magnetic field, which means every time a current flows through something like a cable or a similar thing, also magnetic field is generated. So those two forces basically always exist or coexist. They always exist together. So this is, of course, very important, because for Healy we use microcurrent, and for MagHealy we use a magnetic field. But of course the microcurrent also creates a magnetic field, and the magnetic field also creates a current. So those two forces are basically the same coin, but just two different sides. And of course, we have different effects using one or the other. So what is the property of an electromagnetic wave? So here you can see the range of MagHealy, which is from 0 to 12.5 megahertz. And in this range, you also have computer, radio, but not the FM radio or cell phones or microwaves, and visible light, and at the end of the day, also X-ray. So those are very high, let's say, frequencies, especially with X-ray or higher and gamma waves. And the higher, of course, the wave, or the higher the frequency, the more energy it also can have, or the more, let's say, destructive it can be. So we are in the very low frequency range, which is a very, let's say, harmless or very easy to use frequency to actually apply a positive effect. When you now go to the different sources of electromagnetic fields, you have, of course, natural sources. That's what our body is also used to. Our body is used to the magnetic field of the Earth, to visible light, lightning. I mean, this doesn't happen so often. And so our body also needs, to a certain degree, a magnetic field. And of course, we added over the years lots of man-made sources like electrical system, X-rays, Wi-Fi modems, remote controls, mobile phones. And just yesterday, someone told me, yeah, after I saw the presentation, um, I remembered that in my sleeping room, I have a Wi-Fi router there and a repeater there. And I said, yeah, maybe you sleep a little better if you remove those things. And he said, yeah, I'm really not really sleeping well. I'm not falling in a deep sleep and so on. So yeah, those electromagnetic fields can also be disturbing for the body. So what electromagnetic radiation are we using? So we are using basically a very low frequency with a low power. And so the energy that we carry is also very low. So there's no harm that can be done with such a low energy and such a low frequency. And what is the influence of magnetic fields on charged particles? And that's especially important because that's how the magnetic field of the MagHealy actually can influence your body. So you have charged particles in your body all over the place because we have ions that are basically traveling in the cell, out of the cell. This all works on let's say, difference in voltage. And only charged particles can then go out and in the cell. And of course, we can use those charged particles to administer the magnetic field. So how are electromagnetic fields measured? It's also important. So of course you have hertz, and hertz means it's 1 cycle per second. So one time this cycle is completed, so from here, from the zero start point to the zero cross point, downwards and upwards, and that's one full wave. This is one full wave, as when you see my mouse cursor, or you can also use this arrow here. So from here to here, that's one full wave, and that equals 1 hertz if it's one wave per second. And if you want to measure the strength of a magnetic field, this is amperes per meter. So A divided by M. So now magnetic field measurement. So the magnetic flux density B is measured in Newton meters per ampere. So Nm divided by A, also called Tesla. And that's also what you will find in the IFU of the MagHealy. So we have 300 microtesla that we are using. And here you can see a nice illustration of a semiconductor, or a SQUID, how it is called, so semiconducting quantum interference device. So you have basically a superconductor, which is cooled usually, and then you have a bias current on both sides, and then you create basically a magnetic field. And you can use such devices also, for example, to measure the very weak magnetic field of the heart. So that's also very important to know. Your heart is pumping, and that your heart pumps, it's basically a current going through your heart. And every time the current goes through, the heart pumps. But also, every time the current flows, a magnetic field is generated. And this magnetic field can actually be measured. So you can measure the ECG with a magnetic field. So what does Einstein have to say about this? So this is quite important because he came up with the very famous formula E equals mc squared. And what you see here, that is, or what is the result here is that matter and energy cannot be created, neither destroyed. So you have energy, you have mass, and then you have the speed of light to the power of 2. So energy and mass are basically in one equation. So either you have more energy, more mass, and this basically goes back and forth, which means matter can be converted into energy and energy into matter, which we see if you basically grow a tree energy is going into the tree, which is the light energy of the sun, the light energy. And then you burn the wood, so you have matter, and then again light is created, which is a fire in this case. So it's always a back and forth. But this also means that every electromagnetic field has an effect on matter. So you can use, of course, the energy of a magnetic field to affect matter. So how is a pulsed magnetic field generated? And that's quite important because that's what we're using when we have a Healy, a MagHealy frequency program, because the frequencies are, of course, pulsed. So to create a magnetic field, you have simply a wire that is wrapped around and is then a coil, basically. And this coil, we have, if you look at the MagHealy, the outer rim, there is a flat coil inside. And actually there are two flat coils inside. That's why we also can create two magnetic fields at the same time. And this magnetic field can, of course, be pulsed. So it can be switched on and off. And up to 12.5 megahertz, of course. So the effects of magnetic fields on our existence, that's something that is actually quite interesting, because our entire existence is constantly influenced by magnetic fields and electromagnetic interaction between Earth and space. So as you know, if there's an eruption in the sun again, a lot of energy is basically created, and this is a huge electromagnetic wave that also reaches Earth. And this is what sometimes can make us a little, let's say, weak, and sometimes it also has a positive effect. And we are using similar magnetic fields to actually support. So the effects of geomagnetic activity on the human body is also quite important. So because you have the tides, so water goes up, water goes down. So the moon is nearer to the Earth, is farther away from the Earth. And those are geomagnetic activities. And they correlate with the human nervous system. So that's also quite important to understand that this magnetic field actually interacts with our nervous system at the end of the day. And of course, we also have special resonances. For example, the Schumann resonances, also frequencies that we are using with the MagHealy. Also quite interesting is that there are theories of different scientists that, for example, the brain is actually a carrier of human consciousness. And how is it carried? It's carried through electromagnetic fields. It's not basically saved somewhere in a neuron or something. No, the electromagnetic fields are actually representing the human consciousness. And also another researcher, Dr. Susan Pocket, she said, okay, maybe our thoughts and emotions, everything is basically in a huge electromagnetic field that contains all those things at the same time. So similar to the information field. And this is, she called it a universal consciousness. And that gives you a glimpse of the magnitude that magnetic fields actually play in our daily life. So what we are using, of course, is on the one hand, the MagHealy Atmosphere app, so the application. So those programs are administered in the room. So because, of course, frequencies can also affect the room energy or the particles that are flying around in the room. And of course, if you have the proper frequencies, you also can have a very harmonizing effect. But it's of course important to know that the power of magnetic fields decrease with the third power, which means the farther away you are from the MagHealy, the way less magnetic field strength you have. And we also performed a study on that with the holistic health program, which was administered in the morning, and the sleep program, which was used in the evening. And we had a really nice increase in well-being and also a reduction in concerns. So the concerns basically reduced about, I don't know, almost 40%. Then, of course, very important is the effects of magnetic fields on water. So water is, as we all know, the cradle of life, basically. And water has a polar structure. So you have the H and the oxygen, so hydrogen and oxygen. And hydrogen is positive and oxygen is negative. So as you call it in chemistry, you have an acceptor and a donor. So the donor in this case is the oxygen and the acceptor is the hydrogen. And those small, very small interactions between those hydrogen or those water molecules are called hydrogen bonds. And they are quite weak and they can form more or less spontaneously, and they can also dissolve very quickly. And if you use now magnetic fields, you can also create hydrogen bonds by administering such a field. And those hydrogen bonds can, of course, form really complex structures. And what are complex structures? Complex structures are basically informations that are encoded in water. And this information we're actually using. So here you have the effects of magnetic fields on water. So there are measured effects like the decrease in surface tension, the increase in viscosity at room temperature, and the change of the rotation and movements of water molecules. And this is actually used in magnetic resonance tomography, so MRT. So if you go to the clinic and then they basically do a imaging of your, how do you call it? Soft tissue, because the magnetic resonance tomography is especially good for soft tissue. Then you basically apply a huge magnetic field, like 1 to 10 Tesla, and then the hydrogen molecules are basically aligning to the magnetic field. And then you switch off the magnetic field, and then they are basically going back to their original position or moving in a certain manner. And this movement is basically recorded, and then you know which tissue you have in the body where, because, of course, for every tissue, there's a different movement that you will register. There are also assumed effects like reduction in intermolecular energy of water, increase in activation energy, and of course, as I already said, the change in hydrogen bonding. And here we have a very interesting experiment of the French immunologist Jacques Benveniste, and later also Luc Montagnier continued his scientific research. And what they basically did, they put DNA strands into the strands into water. Then they removed the DNA strands, and there was also only the basically magnetic information contained in the water or remained in the water. And then they used PCR to basically recreate the DNA strands. And that's quite fascinating because the information of the DNA, which is, I mean, not ultimately very complex, but quite extensive, was reproduced simply out of the information that the water carried. And here we have, of course, the water application, so the water programs. And there we use, of course, also quantum analyzed frequencies to inform the water. And Here we made a study, and we also looked at the quality of life and the decrease in concerns. And maybe what is the decrease in concerns in the study? You always ask the people, okay, do you have something that is currently bothering you? So I don't sleep well, I'm unhappy, I have pain somewhere. And then you use the programs, and in this case, it was the fitness program, the energy and the cell harmony program, morning, afternoon, and evening. So you inform a glass of water with those programs, and then you drink it. And after 2 weeks, basically, you ask the person again, how is it with your pain? How is it with your tiredness or whatever? Did it improve? And there we had a very large effect, so it really improved a lot. Then effects of the magnetic fields on the body. So there's one interesting paper that basically looks at the intensity also of magnetic fields. Because if you have a low magnetic field, you can have a very positive effect. If it's too high, you can also have a negative effect. And in this study, they basically looked at reactive oxygen species, so ROS. And they basically form and have a positive effect at low intensity. And McHealy is exactly in this low intensity range. Electromagnetic fields and the human body. That's also quite important because we have, of course, countless weak currents going through our whole body. So you can also see here the heart, which is especially big, as we already had. And what does it really affect? Our digestion, the brain activity, the heart functions, the central nervous system. They only function through the redistribution of charged particles. This means, of course, you can also influence all those systems with magnetic fields. So here we have also the classic app. So the classic programs basically, and those are based on lots of different papers that we basically looked at and studies that are there for I don't know how many years, and also new studies are published constantly on different frequencies with magnetic fields that actually have a positive effect. And we also have in the MagHealy, of course, our patented technology. So the biofeedback process that we have with our quantum noise source. So the resonance sensor basically is infrared based and can actually have a very unique result based on your personal body feedback, which is mainly the infrared rays that you are emitting. So McHealy classic study. That was also quite interesting because here we didn't assess one thing or two. No, we assessed four things, and that's the quality of life, the decrease in concerns, the decrease in burnout, and the increase in mood score. And we used the programs positive mood and regeneration. And there we had again a very high effect size with the concerns, and also a very large effect with mood, and also a very large effect with well-being. So very effective programs. Now I immediately jump to frequency-specific microcurrent. So because we have a fourth category of programs, and that is the McMakin programs. And basically Carol McMakin used frequency-specific microcurrent since 1995. And what is the difference between frequency-specific microcurrent and normal microcurrent? In frequency-specific microcurrent, you usually use two parallel stimulation outputs. So you have two times the possibility to create a frequency with a certain magnetic field, in our case with the MagHealy, or also electrical field or microcurrent. And the history of FSM is also quite interesting because more than 100 years ago, we already had frequency modulated microcurrent. And those effects were also researched and successfully used until the 30s, 1930. And then there were regulatory changes in the US, especially, that basically banned all alternative treatments, homeopathy, herbs, microcurrent. So the pharma industry back then basically said, okay, we have very special effects. We have very good studies, and everything else is just not good enough anymore. But she basically in 1995 re created or reused or refound this technique to use two channels with microcurrent devices. And only 2 years later, she already started teaching physicians, therapists, and alternative practitioners worldwide and did many studies. Also in our clinical evaluation for our medical certification for Healy, we also have some studies of her inside. And she enabled a lot of professional users to become aware of this method and actually use it in daily practice. And on the left side, you can see also you have a channel A and you have a channel B, and then you have a channel A plus B. So there we have an interference frequency. So basically, two frequencies are combined. And what we are using in the MagHealy with those programs is only the frequency range from 0.5 Hertz to 1000 Hertz. Why? Because those are the most physiological frequencies, because our nerves, our brain, our muscles, everything, they are also working in this frequency range. And what we use or how it is done, basically, how do you combine those frequencies? Because those are very specific protocols. They never change. I mean, they're sometimes improved, and you always have different pairs of frequencies. In this case, you have the channel A, and it always indicates an imbalance in the bioenergetic field, for example, for in this case, 970 Hertz. And then you have a frequency on channel B, which is basically indicating the target. For example, the tendon, so the bioenergetic field of the tendon. So you see you have a certain imbalance and you have a certain place where the imbalance happens or occurs. And then with this combination, you're basically addressing this. And of course, you have FSM and McHealy. And instead of microcurrent, of course, we're using a magnetic field. So we're using the same frequencies, the same protocols, the same two frequencies at the same time, but administering this through two magnetic fields. And we worked very closely with Karen McMakin to actually create this product to recreate what she is actually using already. Because she had another magnetic field applicator that has a weaker magnetic field, was not so convenient, and of course not usable without a microcurrent machine. So that's the beauty of MagHealy. It's completely independent. You can carry it everywhere. You just need an app to run it, and no big cables, nothing. So how do I apply the MagHealy programs? So each program, of course, contains a description where you basically put the MagHealy, how long the program runs, and of course, you can also change the intensity. So do you want, I don't know, 30% of intensity, 100% of intensity? And they usually start at 20% because 20% are already enough to have a nice magnetic field with a certain frequency. Because you always need to take into account there are two effects that you have with the MagHealy, two main effects. One is, reasons for effects So one is the magnetic field itself. So the magnetic field itself has a effect on the body. And on the other hand, you have the frequency. And the frequency, of course, is a certain information. Every frequency has a certain information. Every frequency has a certain effect. So if you basically have the right frequency, you don't ultimately need a very high magnetic field, because the frequency, so the information of the frequency, is the thing that actually is mainly responsible for the effect. Question and answer. So how many programs can I run a day? Usually 1 to 3 programs. Always depends on your personal fitness. So I wouldn't recommend to run a lot of programs if you're not so fit anymore, because always you give an information to the body and the body needs to digest the information. And if you give too much information, you simply overwhelm your system. And then, of course, the positive effects are reduced, because you cannot have so much things going on at the same time if you don't have the energy to administer the change. Then also a question, do I feel something when I have a magnetic field application? So there are very few people that actually feel the magnetic field, but usually magnetic fields cannot be perceived in any way. Are there any contraindications? So the contraindication is, of course, again, pregnancy, pacemakers, heart disease, and epilepsy. So if you are in doubt, so you don't know, can I use it? If I have a certain condition, I don't know, always ask a physician. Do I need to drink water before and after use? Yes, very important. Also for microcurrent applications, always drink approximately 1 liter 4 hours before use, and of course also half a liter after. So I say always, before you use it, drink a glass of water. After you use it, drink a glass of water. That's the minimum you should do. And of course, it's clear water. So very important here, the note, caffeine, alcohol, this is not real hydration. This is usually dehydrating. So use very clear, still water. So I think you cannot spend enough money on water or too much money on water, because water is really very important for the body to actually detox, to get all the toxins out, to be refreshed. So search for water that actually has a very good taste, that you really like to drink, and no bubbles inside, because this is usually also disturbing. It's more, making the body usually more acid, and actually is not, helping so much as a normal water could do. And last but not least, we also did a study with the McMakin programs. And in this case, we used brain harmony and vagus harmony, one in the morning, one in the evening. And then we looked at the well-being and the concerns again. And again, a very large effect from concerns. And I also can personally recommend the brain harmony. So if you have lots of stress, or are a little, I don't know, what do you call it? Maybe desperate, not desperate is the wrong word. But it's too much going on and you don't know where you are standing. Just use this to calm down, to be relaxed. I really use it a lot on my father, and he's always very peaceful afterwards. And that's always helping. And here, finally, we have some references, and that's about it. Thank you. So I'm looking at questions now.
So thank you, Martin, for this interesting training. We have one question. The water intake is for McHealy or both Healy and McHealy. Is alkaline water preferred?
So I personally wouldn't recommend alkaline water. I really would recommend I mean, I don't want to make too much advertisement, but I always use this Plose water or Laurentana water because it should be a very natural spring water and really go with your personal taste. Buy 10, 20 different water brands and simply taste, okay, does it taste good? Do I like it? Ideally, of course, the water also has a more acidic pH value, so about 6.5, something like that. That would be ideal. So if you find a water with 6.5 pH value and also yeah, something that tastes good, that's what you should go for.
Okay.
And
And
of
then,
course, maybe the water intake is both for McHealy and Healy very important because you have simply much yeah, greater effects if you use decent water before and after the application of a program. So you always also, at least for me, that's the case if I use a frequency program, either with Healy or McHealy. I'm always thirsty afterwards and a little, I don't know, not numb, but I know that my body experienced something and needs to do something. And if you have water, usually everything runs smooth.
okay, perfect. Thank you. And then we have another question. Atmospheric programs, for how long do I use it?
That is a very specific question because that's usually depends on what you're using this for. If you have a certain, let's say, goal in mind, then you use it until the goal is achieved, or you have also times of that you make a break. So usually, if you sleep, you should not use those programs. If they are sleep programs, of course, yes, you use them during sleep, but you should always have breaks in between. So I would only use them during the day or during the night, not the whole time running through. Except if you have something like a room harmonization or something, then of course this can run all the time. But that really depends on your application. So what you actually want to achieve. Because if you're not really into the magnetic field, so really very near to the McHealy, there's no harm done. So you can also run them as long as you want.
Okay. And another question, what if someone is not allowed to drink that much quantity of water due to medical restrictions?
I mean, the amount of water you drink, or you should drink with magnetic field or microcurrent applications, is just when you apply them, you drink more water. If you are only allowed to drink, I don't know, half a liter a day, hopefully it's more, but let's imagine half a liter, then you would drink, I don't know, 200 milliliter around the application. That it's just around the application. You simply drink the main amount of your water in the day.
Okay, perfect. We have answered our questions. Thank you so much, Martin, for your training. And I wish you all a nice weekend and see you in May for the next training. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.